Hi, boys and girls. Welcome back to a brand new week. I'm a little late today at getting your chapter book out for your after lunch reading. You're probably expecting Magic Treehouse book number 25, but I've decided I'm going to let 25, 26, 27, 28 be your first summer read that maybe mom or dad might read to you after school is out. So I've introduced you to books numbers 1 through 24, so you'll have to wait and see where number 25 takes you on the next Magic Treehouse Adventures with Jack and Annie. I've also introduced you to Ready Freddy. So there are lots of stories that have the main character Ready Freddy that you could read. And of course you've met Junie B. Jones. So I thought this week I would introduce you to a new character, and he has several books that also have him as the main character, and that is Flat Stanley. Now there is only 5 chapters in the Flat Stanley in this particular book. It is written by Jeff Brown and pictures by Scott Nash. So I will only read 1 chapter a day to you this week. So this is Flat Stanley. And chapter 1 is called The Big Bulletin Board. And you will notice behind me, I'm sitting in front of an old-fashioned bulletin board. This one I happened to have up at Parkview before I moved over to Eagleview. And you just take thumbtacks and you put little interesting things up. These were just a few things that actually were still attached to it. And of course it was in Mrs. Kogo's collection someplace. So, chapter 1, The Big Bulletin Board. Breakfast was ready. "I will wake the boys," Mrs. Lambchop said to her husband, George Lambchop. Just then their younger son Arthur called from the bedroom he shared with his brother Stanley. "Hey, come and look! Hey, come and look!" Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop were both very much in favor of politeness and careful speech. "Hay is for horses, Arthur, not people," Mrs. Lambchop said as they entered the bedroom. "Try to remember that, please." "Excuse me," Arthur said, "but look." He pointed to Stanley's bed. Across it lay an enormous bulletin board that Mr. Lambchop had given the boys for Christmas so that they could pin up pictures and messages and maps. It had fallen during the night, right on top of Stanley. But Stanley was not hurt. In fact, he would still have been sleeping if it had not been for being awoken by his brother's shouts. "What's going on here?" he called out cheerfully from beneath the huge bulletin board. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop hurried to lift it from the bed. "Heavens!" said Mrs. Lambchop. "Gosh!" said Arthur. "Stanley's flat." "As a pancake," said Mr. Lambchop. "It's the darndest thing I've ever seen." "Let's all have breakfast," said Mrs. Lambchop. "Then Stanley and I will go to see Dr. Dan and hear what he has to say." She doesn't seem at all alarmed that her son is flat as a pancake. In his office, Dr. Dan examined Stanley all over. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Does it hurt very much?" "Well, I felt sort of tickly for a while after I got up," Stanley Lambchop said, "but I feel just fine now." "Well, that's mostly how it goes in these cases," said Dr. Dan. "We'll just have to keep an eye on this young fellow," he said when he'd finished the examination. "Sometimes we doctors, despite all our years of training and experience, can only marvel about how little we really know." Mrs. Lambchop said she thought Stanley's clothes would have to be altered from a tailor from now on, so Dr. Dan told his nurse to take Stanley's measurements. Mrs. Lambchop wrote them down. Looks like his arm's just about 10 inches long now. Stanley was 4 feet tall. That's a yardstick plus 1 more ruler on the top. And just about a foot wide. That's 1 ruler. And only a half an inch thick. And that's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2 will be called Being Flat. So join me tomorrow for chapter 2 of Flat Stanley, written by Jeff Brown and pictures by Scott Nash. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.